Mr. H here. Grab your chips and pop a beer. This is a tale you'll dig hearty to hear. Oh, settle down, XJ7. I wasn't rapping. It's just a rhyme. His name, Drayton Amherst, age 39. A man pushing the frontiers of science, pushing the boundaries of life extension, and coming to grips with what becomes unleashed during the experiments where men attempt to re-engineer themselves to be gods. Location, Naples, Florida, USA. Date, May 2035. The future brings one simple reality: death. In the future, everything dies, and that reality is one hard wall to knock down or to get over. Most ignore it, belching platitudes like, "The future is always brighter," or "Time heals all wounds," etc. Blah, blah, nonsense! The time is the great destroyer. It mulches up everything ever made and turns it back into the raw materials from which the future is crafted by those that inhabit it. But enough of this preamble. Drayton Amherst was one of the multitude hoping to finally escape the snares of death and decay with the strong arm of science, to guide and drive and ramrod that wall of inevitability. And this time it was sure to succeed. Only a couple years previous, another research team from Indiana had solved the problem of missing, lost, or malformed mutilated flesh. Initially, it was thought some form of nanobots would do the repairs and rebuilding of lost limbs and diseased body parts. Wrong! They found a way to work microbiotics engineered into DNA construction crews, which would complete what nature wasn't able to. First, they found a war veteran with a missing leg, and within a few weeks, his leg regenerated. Then a baby born without forearms. Then people with sclerosis of the liver and cancers galore, and onward it went. The success rate was 100%, and medicine was never less invasive or effortless. Amherst's team in Naples felt they could use the very same idea of microbiotics combined with DNA re-engineering to overcome the effects of time. They now believed they could reverse aging and even raise the dead. Heady stuff indeedy doodles. Amherst himself was not one of the core scientists, but instead a lesser worker in the laboratories whom deigned to place himself in the guinea pig goalposts and become a test subject. And thus Drayton Amherst was to be injected with various concoctions and then irradiated to set the minuscule manufacturing process in action. The shots were no big deal. Everything went as planned. However, when he was irradiated in a fashion meant to activate the little beasties within, Drayton Amherst fell over dead and decayed into dog meat within minutes. The remains were awful. A stench-filled stack of meat and innards chewed up by little micro-marionettes loosed into a perfectly functioning body and running amok without a guide to control them. Within half an hour, all that remained were some odd bits of bone and internal organs grown cold and stale. Thus ended Drayton Amherst. The failure was covered up and hushed immediately. If this tragic and horrific moment in scientific history was to gain publicity, the Institute's progress toward defeating death itself would be shelved. A funding cut! And no one would go home in a Porsche or a Bentley ever again. And then one day, like a miracle, Drayton Amherst showed up to work. He just bumbled into the front doors and went to work again, amid a gaggle of agape scientific cohorts. When questioned, he merely said he awoke in the middle of the woods, surrounded by animal remains, bloodied and bare naked. It was somewhere in Wisconsin that he came to, and made his way into a small town to get clothes and some food and help to get back home to Naples, Florida. From there, he went home and got ready for work. Everyone was stone-cold shocked at this weird turn of events. They tested him and found he still contained the microbiotic injections. The diminutive DNA doctors were all active and clearly not detrimental. Questioned again, asked what he last remembered that day at the Institute when irradiated and soon dissolved, Drayton replied that he thought of childhood camping in Wisconsin. A revelation! Drayton told how he felt sick during radiation treatment, and it reminded him of a sickness he endured as a child while in the wilderness with family. That reminded him of hot chocolate by fires in the hinterland. And then he awoke there. The top science advisor asked Drayton to think about being somewhere else, to be perhaps in Georgia. And lo! Drayton's body dissolved within mere minutes, eaten away by whatever properties unexpectedly manifested from their impious medical imposition on Drayton's biology. And once more, they were left holding the bag of rotted flesh that remained. A panic again. This time it wasn't as bad. Most were assured Drayton would arrive back in Naples, Florida once more. And he did. It was a few days later. Drayton strolled back in with a similar story about being out in the woods and waking with the smell of animal carrion about him. And he was once more naked and looking for help to recover some clothes and get transport back home to Naples and the Institute. Sure enough, these brave and bold boys of scientific beneficence prepared a further test immediately. This time they asked Drayton to keep it local and imagine himself in a favorite restaurant in the Naples area. And lo, he dissolved again. Within a minute, the team at the Institute heard a huge lightning bolt strike the city. A crack of air parted so extreme and forceful that it deafened most near to it. But the effects were temporary. The science team discovered what had transpired when police called them mere minutes later. A true hullabaloo had erupted in Naples. And after some identification and legal wrangling had been enacted, the Institute returned Mr. Amherst to their facility. The tales were grotesque, gory, gruesome, sickeningly gross. A young and very pretty waitress at the Floral Cucina del Norte had recounted to police that her customer, a Mr. Hornsby, became visibly ill at about the time of the last experiment's initiation. He flopped about, distended from several points of his anatomy, and from within the obese man exploded outward the form of one Drayton Amherst. The remaining chunks of Mr. Hornsby's flesh flew outward onto the floor with copious blood, while Amherst's lifeless form flopped onto the tiles, covered in Hornsby's blood. Seconds later, while everyone in the restaurant formed a wide berth to this grisly and confusing affair, a swift and super-powerful bolt of lightning arced down from above, cleaving the ceiling and hitting the prone Drayton Amherst. Immediately, Drayton started to convulse, to breathe, and move, standing slowly, naked in the middle of the Floral Cucina del Norte. Drayton Amherst continued the story from there to tell the startling tale of his rebirth into the world. People were screaming and running away. Police arrived, covered and cuffed him, and took him into custody. The end. Or the beginning, so to speak, because from there, Drayton Amherst and the Institute believed this was the miracle they had reached for, however awful the consequences were. Repeated trials on new individuals didn't repeat the desired effect. Most had no ill effects, but no amazing transmogrifications or epiphanies of biological translation, such as the powers now held by Drayton. It was baffling. So eyes focused on the initial subject and pushed aside the repeatability of the experiment, rather to fathom the limits of Drayton's abilities. It became clear that whatever was active within Drayton would demolish him where he stood and reconstitute him from raw materials elsewhere. Obviously, it would use flesh of other creatures, though with time they found it would also take raw materials from the ground or foliage or other items around the spot Drayton grew from. To help hone the skill, they would provide photos of Drayton to use as a point to where he would spring anew, so he would compile a new body from items that weren't alive. Every time it was enacted, it was a pure success, and a giant lightning bolt, like a finger from God above, would kick life into the corpse of the freshly regrown Drayton Amherst. All the scientists could postulate was that the process was recreating the flesh, and it made some kind of positive electric field that would draw negative electron discharge from high in the Earth's atmosphere. But it was merely speculation until it could be verified by lengthy testing. Within months, Drayton was utilized to rescue people from accidents and misguided meanderings in distant places. It was a hopeful and exciting time. News of Drayton was leaked out slowly, thoughtfully, to carve knowledge of his existence into the minds of the populace and politicians. Soon, the singular scientific subject was brought before the head generals and chiefs of the Council on Foreign Relations and Department of Defense in the USA. This boastful and bullying group of bellicose officials were intent on using Drayton for their own good, for a tool to kill and reshape the world affairs to their own crafty plans laid long ago. However, on seeing the lack of empathy or care for the lives of individuals these people had, Drayton snapped. He believed his life wasn't to be used for such distasteful chess games. Drayton realized he didn't like the world he lived in, and that these people were the leader of millions, and yet were just maniacs out for their own insidious evils. Afterward, Drayton recounted to the press that he discovered a different side to reality he had never contemplated, and he had acted. Though previously he had been emotionally shattered at how he ended a man's life at a restaurant in Naples, his remorse froze over, and from that meeting room filled with military might emerged a naked and bloodied Drayton Amherst. His arrival from within the room was heralded by dozens of lightning strikes, and all that was left behind him were fragments of flesh from the detonated bodies of all involved. Drayton had moved from his own body into each of the men present, killing them as he grew from within them and remade himself anew. Military guards witnessing this pummeled Amherst's body with destructive rounds of ballistics, tearing his flesh apart. Yet he grew anew from inside soldiers in the corridors, killing several until the bullets stopped, and Amherst could stride from the doors of that defense building and wander unabated into the world outside. Later that week, live on television, Drayton reappeared. From within the Secretary General of the United Nations, delivering a speech to the Assembly. a clap of thunder, a blinding strike of lightning, and all news channels and many other television networks switched on the visual feed from the United Nations. Drayton detailed to the captive audience, the population of planet Earth, how he would now frame their laws and actions. The laws and actions of humanity. Those that would not cede power to him would suffer the same fate as the Secretary General. It didn't deter many world leaders, and Drayton would reform from within them through the next days, then escape to live as he wished. His missives were distrait and weird. Amherst called for people to pursue the sciences, to be creative, and stop impressing themselves onto others. Instead, everyone was to merely make and produce and be happy. That wasn't comforting to the war machinery at work in the nations of Earth. And so Amherst spent months utilizing his powers to kill and kill again. Finally, a coalition was gathered to appease the maniacal monster of Drayton Amherst. His power was beyond the ability of humans to control or counter. All governments submitted to Drayton. He was omnipowerful. His will was to be obeyed. He would command all armed forces and affairs of the state of the world as a whole. And so it was. One fateful day, after boring years of peace and prosperity across the terrain of this fair planet, Drayton was approached by some of his military chiefs, still commanding a skeletal group of adventurers and police. They related how a nuclear submarine was in danger, and the crew were possibly dead unless they could be reached and given instruction on how to maneuver their craft from precipitous peril. The USS Trump was beneath the west coast of America, caught in a maze of caverns that riddled the mantle and went far inland, as far as Nevada. Communications had gone dark. No one could find the unfortunate craft. It was surmised they had gone into an improper direction and were caught in the stalactites and stalagmites of the mysterious subterranean caverns. Pictures were given to Drayton to show him where the meats and foods were located on the submarine. Amherst was told the best method for arrival would be to use the food as a substrate for his new body. Agreed, Drayton Amherst dissolved, and using his mind's eye, guided himself into the craft, where he saw men sitting around in the semi-dark. Then went into the food stores and reformed himself out of various sides of beef and vegetables, to flop on the floor, lifeless. Lightning struck from above, again and again, never able to reach the lifeless body trapping Amherst's mind and etheric essence. Again and again, terrific strokes pelted the ground of Nevada in the middle of the desert, never to penetrate and go thousands of feet down to the submarine. Inside the darkened vessel, down in the clandestine cave system, an elderly and lone military general smiled as the air grew thin. Around him were the ersatz bodies of sailors, crafted from cloth and stuffing like dolls on parade. That aged man of battle and brass benefit laughed quietly, knowing his plan had worked. The terror of the Reconstituted Man would forever be ended, and bloodshed, strife, and strategy amongst the nations could continue again, unabated, forever. Drayton Amherst's new body would grow cold and remain lifeless, waiting for the life-giving strike from the firmament that would reanimate him. Yet he was forever now one of the sleepers, bound to be a casualty of his own hubris. Forevermore, lightning would relentlessly pound sand above his head, seeking to reunite life with limb. A man, once more, outsmarted nature, and death could proceed. A full force.
Like and subscribe before I die. And ring the little bell or you will surely go to hell.
Oh, we're telling spooky stories. This is not a spooky story. Oh, there's no way on the couch I can
it
say.
depends how you look at it. It is kind of spooky.
I guess so.
Wait, that's it? That's the end of the story?
That is a